Recently, I've been very vocal about the issue of far-right extremism and why I feel it needs to be called out and recognised. Well, in this video, I want to be explicitly clear that I also feel that other forms of extremism need to be recognised and called out. And I think one of the worst in this country, certainly if we look at sheer numbers of casualties, is Islamic extremism, i.e., Islamism. Now, Islamism doesn't always manifest itself in actual violence. Often it's proselytizing. And I've been reading the book on and off. The book's by Ed Hussein, the Islamist, published, I believe, in about 2008 or the late 2000s. That's the author. He was a young man who got involved with Hizb ut-Tahrir and gradually went down a path of Islamic fundamentalism. Now, I don't think he was ever convicted of terrorism offences in the UK, but he recognised that he was going down the wrong path and he got away from it. But one thing that comes through in this book, and I've not finished the book, but it's just how manipulative these groups are. For example, there were, to be fair, imams who tried to turn young people away from extremists and who rejected extremist groups from their mosques. They would expel them from the mosques. But then Hizb ut-Tahrir was a lot more savvy than a middle-aged imam who's just leading Friday prayers. What they would do is they would go to the internet, they would proselytize the young, and they would convince them that they were living in a state that saw them as the enemy. So, like with that, like the situation you get with all extremism, there's brainwashing involved, there's proselytizing involved, particularly of young, impressionable people, particularly of young, lonely, angry men. Sometimes women as well, but we've seen that with Shamina Begum and others. But um, if a young Muslim guy is being told all the time that he's second-class citizen, that the British hate him, that he, you know, if he's being treated with this victimhood narrative, then that plays a very big part in indoctrination ultimately. And then he's given a selective history lesson. He'll be showing Srebrenica. He'll be showing atrocities against Muslims. He won't be showing the atrocities that Muslims have committed, of course. So it's selective, right? Um, this is how radicalisation works. It's often based on selective outrage and playing up a victimhood narrative. That's why I'm very critical of the likes of critical race theory. I don't want to go off subject here, but my critique is that they teach minority people to be perpetual victims and white people as perpetual perpetrators. It's a very toxic way of looking at the world, and it's divisive, and it wedges people apart. Um, I think that there is unquestionably denialism when it comes to Islamic extremism, despite everything we've seen in this country, despite terrorist atrocities like London in 2005, London in 2017, Manchester in 2017, attempted attacks in Glasgow and Exeter, um, lone wolf attacks, and I didn't mention Reading in 2020, another attack in London in 2019. I mean, there is abundant evidence of how Islamic extremism manifests in terms of violence. Um, and we've seen this across the world, actually. I was going to say across Europe, across the world. So to me, saying the likes of ISIS, Boko Haram, Al Shabaab, Al Qaeda have nothing to do with Islam, it's disingenuous, and I don't think it's particularly helpful. Now, during the riots, the Archbishop of Canterbury condemned far-right groups for using Christian symbolism. He may be right to condemn that, and I understand why he would want to do so. Likewise, I do understand why Muslims would want to distance their faith from terrorist fanatics. But when you have Islamic fanatics who will literally pick out who is a Muslim and who isn't, as what happened in the Kenya mall atrocity some years ago, saying that it's got nothing to do with Islam is like saying the Crusades have got nothing to do with Christianity, the historic Crusades. Islamic fundamentalism, I've said this before, absolutely is part of Islam. Now, I appreciate that there'll be imams, for example, who will say, but they're distorting the Quran, that they're theologically wrong. And they may well be. I'm not a theologian, it's not my place to say that. But put it this way, Islam is a major world faith. Now, what is the chances that there are no extremists among Muslims? That's just nonsense. Statistically, that's impossible. So when Muslims say they've got nothing to do with Islam, it's evasive and it's unhelpful. I also believe the term Islamophobia continues to be weaponized. I saw a debate on Al Jazeera recently about, they were arguing about how anti-Semitism can be weaponized to silence criticism of Israel, and I think there's some truth in that. But I wanted to say, well, wait a second, Al Jazeera, based in Qatar, what's your attitude to Islamophobia? You've often reported on Islamophobia. Well, Islamophobia can be weaponized to silence legitimate criticism of Islamic zealotry. An example of this would be the way Robert Jenrick was pounced on recently, which is why I felt the need to make the video defending him. He was very specifically talking about when groups of masked men shout Allahu Akbar in a protest in an intimidating way. I'm aware that it means God is great, but I'd like Muslims to accept that that can be intimidating to non-Muslims, particularly when it has been used in terrorist attacks. So Jenrick wasn't talking about Muslims saying that in their own home or in the mosque. He was talking about a specific situation, and I think it's a bit pathetic how the left, purely for partisan reasons, decide to attack him and lump him in with far-right agitators. It's absolute nonsense. In fact, from what I gathered, Jenrick was calling for tough policing all round, and he's absolutely right to do so. He's currently the front runner to be the next Tory leader. This is not to say I'll agree with him on everything, of course I won't. I'm sure there'll be another video where I'll be criticising him. He of course made that notorious thing in the refugee holding centre where he spoke about the cartoons being covered over, which wasn't exactly good PR. But on this occasion I think he was right. Islamic extremism is a reality in our midst. Often the security services are criticised. So when we have a terrorist attack, I remember this was the case after the Westminster Bridge attack and also the Fishmongers Hall attack. The question was, well, why wasn't this person arrested if they were on the radar? The problem is there's literally thousands of extremists out there. Now, I'm reluctant to criticise the security services because every single day they're saving lives and preventing terrorist atrocities. The police, I'm not so sure about. I think there are times the police could be more proactive than they are. But you have to remember, this is a question of deciphering what is a priority. If you have, for example, three guys, you have one who's developing a website based on hate, you have another who's hate preaching, you have another who is proselytizing to the young. They're all arguably dangerous. So should all be arrested? Probably yes. I know that recently Anjim Chowdhury's just got a hefty prison sentence for his hate preaching. The problem is our prisons are overcrowded, and from a logistical point of view, it probably would be difficult to just arrest thousands of people at once. But I certainly think there should be more arrests of Islamic fundamentalists. And I do think the police have failed to show consistency. Again, this idea of two-tier policing, I don't think it's entirely without merit. It may be that it's not specifically deliberately organised by the police to have a different type of policing, but whether inadvertently or not, that is the perception that they've given. I'm going to have to wrap up this video because I've limited space, but there has to be an acknowledgement that Islamic fundamentalism is a problem in this country, and the left and some Muslims have to stop deflecting and weaponizing the term Islamophobia and pretending that this problem doesn't exist. When a teacher is forced into hiding, it's a disgrace. Islamic fundamentalism is a reality. It needs to be called out by ideology, Islamic fundamentalism, and let's stop having this attitude, it's got nothing to do with Islam. Even if you want to argue that theologically they've got it wrong, the fact of the matter is they themselves come from a Muslim background and they see themselves as devout Muslims. You can argue about theology, but there's over 1 billion Muslims in the world, so don't pretend that there isn't extremism out there, because there is. And yes, you get it in every faith, But we have in Europe a particular problem with this, and we have to be honest about it.